Hello, my name is Naila Cox. I will be reading Green Angel by Alice Hoffman today. If you like the way that I read it, like, subscribe, do all of the YouTube things. Alright, here we go. This is how it happened. I once believed that life was a gift. I thought whatever I wanted I would someday possess. Is that greed or only youth? Is it hope or stupidity? As far as I was concerned, the future was a book I could write to suit myself, chapter after chapter of good fortune. All was right with the world, and my place in it was assured, or so I thought then. I had no idea that all stories unfold like white flowers, petal by petal, each in its own time and season, dependent on circumstance and fate. The future is something no one can foretell. My family had always lived on the ridgetop above the village in a country where days were sunny and warm. At twilight, dusk wove across the meadows like a dream of the next day to come. People said we were blessed, and maybe that was true. My father was honest and strong. My mother collected blue jay feathers, preferring them to her pearls. My little sister, Aurora, was as wild as she was beautiful. Aurora could climb a tree in the blink of an eye. She could disappear into the woods like moonlight. She could dance for hours and never tire. I was the least among them, nothing special, just a girl. I was a moody, dark weed. Still, they called me Green because of my talents in the garden. My mother was the one who taught me everything I knew, to bury old boots beneath the peach trees to ensure they'll bear the sweetest fruit, to douse roses with vinegar water to chase away beetles, to plant when the moon wanes and harvest when it is on the rise. My sister Aurora could never sit still and pay attention. She chased after frogs, she trailed her prettiest dresses through the mud. She stole apples from our neighbor's orchard. She laughed so hard whenever her little snappy terrier, Onion, danced on his hind legs. We thought she'd never come to her senses. Aurora didn't listen to a word my mother said. We all knew she couldn't stay in one place any longer than the moonlight could. Every time she ran through the garden, the warblers and sparrows would follow her. Bees would drink the sweat from her skin and never once sting. My mother laughed and said the honey in our hives would taste especially wild and sweet. At night, Aurora and I shared a room. Aurora slept without blankets or pillows, her pale hair streaming. Once or twice I had awoken to spy her curled up on the floor with her little dog. As she dreamed, white moths hovered above her, more drawn to her than they were to the moon or to the lantern my father kept on the porch, a beacon that signaled to anyone who might lose his way in the woods. Aurora was made out of laughter and moonlight, but I was nothing like that. Unlike my fearless sister, I was afraid of blackbirds and thunder. I couldn't get a good night's sleep unless I had 3 feather pillows under my head and 2 down quilts covering me. But I was the one who could sit in the garden for hours, unmoving, as I watched seedlings unfold. I was Green, with my long, dark hair and my endless patience, a weed who grew too tall. I was Green, who never smiled at anyone, who preferred roses and asparagus to people. I was shy and ill at ease, uncomfortable with girls my own age, unwilling to talk to boys at school. I wasn't good company, that was true, and people avoided me, but that was all right. I was too busy dreaming. My head was in the clouds, even on the days we went into town. I didn't notice when people said hello to me. I was too busy thinking about the future to come. When my mother sent us to do her shopping, I was too timid to enter the market, and sent my sister in my place. Aurora laughed at how faint-hearted I was. "They won't bite you," she said. All the same, I kept my distance. I didn't mind if the shopkeepers favored my sister. They gave her sweets, mints, and sugared almonds, which she would share evenly, 50-50. Aurora always remembered me. I was a reflection of what she was, a dark pond to mirror her moonlight. I hugged her, grateful that she didn't notice I was less than she was. I ran home with her through the woods, even though she was faster and more graceful than I would ever be. I didn't care who preferred my good-natured sister. I was Green, who was more comfortable in shadows. Green, who faded in the light of my sister. How could I not defer to her? The moon itself paled compared to her. Even the white moths would rather circle around her than fly into the sky up above. But I knew how to listen. I was the one who paid attention to the lessons my mother taught us. I learned that the roots of the foxglove were poisonous, that verbena could quiet headaches, that quince could be boiled into a sticky, delicious jam, In time, I knew more than my mother. Soon she began to turn to me for advice. When should we harvest? When should we sow? What would do best in the patch of sunlight beside the gate? I could whisper to the old twisted wisteria, and it would turn green at my urging. I could encourage the sweet peas to blossom with one word. Let Aurora smile at the shopkeepers and wave to the boys in the schoolyard. My dreams were of night-blooming flowers, white on the outside, but green as my heart on the inside, green as my garden grew. I never complained when people didn't notice me. I was certain my time would come soon enough. It was dirt under my fingernails, and I was too shy to speak. But on my next birthday, I would turn 16. Everything would change then. I would cast away my fears and step into the future. I would comb the tangles from my hair and wash the dirt away. And when I walked through the town, people would whisper, "Is that green?" And I would say, "Yes, it's me. I've been here all along, but you've been too blind to see." I would have gone with my family on the day that it happened, but someone had to stay at home and pull weeds. Someone had to coax the tomatoes into turning red and persuade the squash to blossoms to bloom. And that person was me. We lived within sight of the city, which glowed silver at night and shone like gold in the afternoon. Every week, we brought our vegetables across the river to sell to city people who couldn't get enough of our peas, lettuce, and beans. Every week, we crossed the bridge. And as we did, I held my breath. I could feel happiness then. I lived for those trips to the city. On the weeks I couldn't go, I pouted for hours. The city was my treasure, and I loved everything about it. The shops on the avenues, the books in the stalls, the chocolates weighed and measured by vendors in the streets. No one in the city cared if your hair was long and tangled, or if there was dirt under your fingernails. No one cared if you whispered a greeting to the linden trees that circled the park where we set up our stands. You could be who you wanted to be in the city. You could be whoever you were deep inside. It was like a garden of people, the only place where I didn't feel alone in a crowd. Naturally, I wanted to go that day. It was my turn, but Aurora was still too young to stay by herself. And on this trip, my father was needed to carry the heavy crates, wooden boxes overflowing from the best harvest we'd had in years. As for my mother, she was the one who drew in the customers, like the white moths who entranced by Aurora. People on the streets couldn't resist my mother's sweet voice, her gentle hands, her long black hair, raven-colored like mine. It was clear she couldn't stay. It made sense for me to work in the garden, for me to be the one who stayed at home. But I was angry all the same. When my family set out to leave, they called goodbye, but I didn't answer. My father whistled a tune, and although the sparrows returned his call, I did not. I wouldn't even look at him, even though he was so strong and so kind. I didn't say a word. "I'll bring you something special," Aurora promised. I knew she'd spend all her free time searching for a gift that would please me, a book or a bag of sweets, but I didn't blow her a kiss or wish her well. "There will be plenty of times for you to be the one to go," my mother told me. My mother, who was so beautiful, who knew the secrets of the growing seasons, who always assured me that everyone had her own path and that mine could be found in the garden. "Green," my mother said to me that day, moments before they left for the city, "we're leaving you behind because you're the one who's needed the most." Now that she was standing next to me, I was surprised to find that I was almost as tall as my mother. I felt my love for her in the back of my throat, like a stone, heavy, making it impossible for me to speak. I was almost a woman myself, too old to admit I was wrong, or so I thought then. Too old to race after my mother when she turned to leave. I had too much pride to say goodbye. I kept my nose in the air and my back to them. I was green, moody, and prideful, and angry. I will forever remember that I turned away. We had so many birds in the trees back then, and each one sang to me while I did my work. I weeded for hours until my hands ached. 3 blue jay feathers drifted down to me. I kept them in my pocket as a gift from my mother if I decided to forgive her. The day was perfect, cloudless and blue. Still, I continued to feel sorry for myself. At noon, I decided to take my lunch up to the hillside that overlooked the city. I let my sister's dog Onion trail after me, even though he was an annoying beggar who sometimes growled when he saw me. Today, Onion tolerated me because my sister wasn't there, but I knew I was just a substitute for Aurora. It was so warm that I was tired by the time I reached the top of the hill. I can remember the way it felt to breathe in the hot, still air, the stitch in my side, the river in the distance as flat as a mirror, the brambles that had caught in my long, black hair, the blue jay feathers in my pocket, the chattering of a wood thrush overhead, the dog whining softly, the pulse in my throat at the moment of the world as it was. People who were close by said they could see people jumping from the buildings, like silver birds, like bright diamonds. The ground shook, people said, but from where I stood, all I could see was smoke. I could hear the whoosh of the fire all these miles away, across the river, past the woods. I could hear it as if it were happening inside my own head. I ran down the hill so fast, my clothes were torn to shreds on the brambles. My heart was in my mouth. I thought my mother, measuring out green beans on a scale with her gentle hands. I thought of my father, who could whistle so many tunes with such sweetness, every variety of bird in our garden would answer. I thought of my sister, whose hair was as white as snow, the wild girl who never stopped to listen, always the opposite of me. My sister, who was as familiar as the moon up above, changeable, yes, but always there for me to depend upon. Ashes had swept across the river in the black whirlwinds. I ran to escape them, through the yard, into the house, but there was no escape. Embers flew in through the open windows and set the ends of my hair on fire. I wrapped a wet towel around my head. Steam rose in billows from beneath the towel, and I smelled like smoke. But worst of all, the embers had flown into my eyes. My eyes burned so badly I grew dizzy with the pain. My sister's little dog had followed me home. He knew something was wrong, and now he barked at the sky, the world, the open door, which I ran to slam shut as I tried to stop the flow of embers. I fastened the bolt, then my hands over my ears. I didn't want to hear the roar of the fire so far away across the river. I wanted silence, peace, blue skies, yesterday. But no matter what, I could hear it still. No matter what, it was burning. I crawled under the dining room table, smelling like smoke and half blinded by cinders. Little bits of hot embers flew under the door. Onion followed and lay shivering in my lap. I was Green, who was too shy to speak. Green, too angry to say goodbye. Green, who was always waiting for the future, biding her time. Now the future was here, and the silver city across the river was on fire, and I was hiding under the table, where I stayed until darkness fell. After a while, I couldn't hear the fire anymore. The dog whimpered, but I hushed him. I could barely see, but my ears were good. I was the one who could hear the wisteria unfolding. I could hear the sweet peas climbing the fence, the asparagus rising through the soil. Now I was listening harder than ever. I was waiting for my family to come home. All they had to do was run from the fire. All they needed was to cross the river, swim if they must, crawl if need be. Find their way home in the dark, in the whirlwinds and the burning embers. Surely they would appear if only I waited long enough. I was patient Green, after all. Green, who knew how to listen. They were in the city for only a single day. Luck couldn't be as bad as that, could it? Was that the way the future worked? Unknowable, unchangeable, always uncertain? They might have gone to the city the day before or the day after. They might have been stopped by the rising of the drawbridge, by a bee sting, by a sudden storm. They might not have gone at all. But they were there when it happened, and I was not. It was days before I stopped listening for them, my mother's footsteps, my father's whistle, my sister's wild laughter. I had already decided that I would not allow myself to cry until they came home safely. Tears now would be an admission that they were gone, that I could stop listening. I wasn't ready for that. Every morning, I rose from my fitful sleep in the bed I'd made beneath the table, expecting to find a trail of my family's footsteps on our dusty floor. I would embrace them and tell them how much I loved them. I would tell them that I'd meant to hug them and kiss them goodbye. Only then would I let my tears wash over my burning eyes. But the days wore on, and I heard nothing. Dark, fury days that were silent as stone. No one came home. No one called out my name. Finally, I went to open the door. I could smell burning metal. I could see sparks in the trees drifting like fireflies. All of those white pages on which I had planned to write my future were burning around the edges, first red, then back, then blue with flame. My sister's dog refused to step past the threshold. He peed in a quarter. He trembled and howled. Poor Onion was missing Aurora. His howls were like mourning cries. I couldn't listen to him, so I went outside, and I looked up at the black sky. My eyes were still burning, my vision was blurry, but even I could tell there were no stars. Ashes were falling down, a soft black rain. The white moths had dropped from above. They'd scattered like leaves, lining the stone path to our door, gleaming like black opals. I found my way back to the top of the hill. There was only a handful of silver on the other side of the river now. Pale beacons, pale light. I thought about how time had always stretched out before me, those white empty pages that were mine alone. I thought about how hot it had been at the moment when it happened, how everything around me had been green as far as the eye could see, how the sky had been so cloudless, not even a puff of white. As I walked back to my house in the dark, making my way past the brambles, I noticed that the songbirds, who were usually asleep in their nest at this hour, were fluttering nervously from tree to tree. It was then I realized it wasn't nighttime at all, but sooty daylight, noon perhaps. The sun had been shadowed by ashes. Now I understood. The world as I knew it was gone forever. What I had thought was the moon up above, as familiar as Aurora's face, was in fact the cloudy sun. On this day, even that circle of light looked so much smaller than it had once been. A teardrop in the sky. People in town must have assumed I had perished along with my family. No one came to search for me, and that was just as well. I was glad to be deep in the woods, away from them all. If anyone had tried to rescue me, I would have hidden behind our barn. I would have gone to the darkest part of the woods where the hedges were 10 feet tall and brambles cut the soles of your feet right through your shoes. My grief was cold. It was nothing to share. It was nothing to speak about, nothing to feel. I ate food from the pantry and kicked at the ashes in the garden. But I was lazy, and I did not work. What was the point? If this was the future, I wasn't certain I wanted to be in it. I started to feel as though I was disappearing. Perhaps I myself was a figment of my own imagination, a storm cloud, a wisp of smoke, a burning ember. I could hear people singing in town. I could hear the church bells ringing. People were going about their business of living as best they could. They could see past today into tomorrow, but not me. My grief had tied me in knots. There was no gas for the stove, but I didn't cut wood. There was no tap water, but I didn't go to the well. If I could have stopped breathing, I would have. I watched time moving, slowly, like dust motes, like gnats on a summer day, circling close but never touching me. I was so quiet, and the house was so dark that anyone coming to call would have guessed there was no one at home. The looters who came must have assumed they had the freedom to do whatever they pleased. What I had was theirs for the taking. What I had was up for grabs. As it turned out, I didn't hear a thing until they were inside the gate. I was deeply asleep. I had fallen into sleep the way stones fall into a well. The looters had stumbled onto the property in the middle of the night, and they didn't even pretend stealth. When I heard them shouting and screaming inside my dreams, I awoke with a start, a cold band across my chest. The dog was whimpering, but thankfully he didn't bark. Silence was what we needed. Silence was all we had while they stole everything worth taking from the garden. I crawled to the window and saw there were maybe a dozen boys and girls my age. They strode over the delicate seedlings with heavy boots. They pawed through the piles of ashes I had planned to rake in their frantic search for anything to eat. They tossed lettuce and cucumbers and squash blossoms into the wheelbarrow they'd stolen from our barn. Whatever they didn't gorge on was loaded onto the wheelbarrow till it was nearly overflowed. Blackened peppers, singed peas, burnt cauliflower, all of it ripped from the garden. All of it gone before I could count to 3. It was quiet because I could tell they'd been drinking. There was the edge of something dark out there in the garden as they tugged and pulled at everything I had worked so hard to grow. Fights broke out. Words were slurred. I recognized a girl named Heather Jones I'd been at school with, along with several boys from my classes. I thought perhaps they had also lost their families. I knew Heather's parents worked in the city. I knew they'd never let her run wild with a greedy horde such as this. No one out in the garden looked like themselves in that black, ashy sky. The boys had painted their faces with mud and berry juice. The girls were all barefoot, in spite of the fact that they were still burning embers at the bottom of the pile of ashes. I had canned food in the pantry, maybe enough to share, but these intruders looked desperate. They wanted to take whatever they saw. They wanted to ruin anything that thwarted them. And the most I could do was crouch by the window and watch them. I was Green, who stayed in the shadows, who shivered and hushed the dog when it whimpered as the looters wrecked fences, tore out stakes, danced in the ashes. Green, who did nothing but shake while the troop in the yard destroyed everything in their path. Perhaps they would have come into the house after they had taken whatever they wanted. Perhaps that was why one of the boys started up the path littered with fallen white moths. But a stone hit that boy square in the back, startling him. He stopped and turned to the woods. Something hooted out there. There was a cackle, human or animal. It was impossible to tell. Afraid? Several in the crowd called when he noticed the other boy had stopped on the path to our house. More stones fell then, one after another. The cackle rose high, a hen, a ghost, a spirit, the wind. No one knew what it was, but the mob was not about to wait and find out. Heather Jones ran away first, crying that there was even worse luck in store for those who stayed where they were. There should have been strength in numbers, but once the looters stopped wrecking things, they were only boys and girls, easily frightened. The rest of the crowd soon followed Heather. Why shouldn't they go? They had already taken everything edible, piled it into the wheelbarrow. They'd already had their fun.